The Three Lessons of Statesmanship, Part 2. This is Ron. Welcome to Story Time. Yesterday we covered the first lesson of the Three Lessons of Statesmanship, and today is the second lesson. The second lesson concerns the limits of war, of politics, indeed of all human action. Churchill helped to save his country by his willingness to fight to the death and to inspire others to join him. He also saved it by his reluctance to do that. In May 1940, Churchill had been absolute, and Britain took an absolute stand. But in his actions and writings, Churchill teaches us that absolute stands are justified only when they are absolutely necessary. From conviction, Churchill was cautious and hesitant about war. He saw its awful power to destroy whole nations or to take over all their energy and life. A nation fully marshaled is a nation with no room for private freedom, no room for citizens to live by no man's leave underneath the law. It is much easier to unmake than it is to remake the world by war or any use of force. One sees Churchill's caution in 1944-45 most vividly in the case of Poland. In the months covered by Volume 20 of the Churchill documents, the fate of Poland hangs in the balance. Britain had come into the war on behalf of Poland, which was attacked in August 1939 by the combined power of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Soon enough to be enemies, but bound at that time by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland was overrun, and there was nothing its ally Britain could do. The onslaught that followed meant the massacre of millions of Poles, including the vast majority of Polish Jews. This gave Britain powerful motive to do all that was possible for Poland at the war's end and in the peace settlement that would follow. But what was possible? At the end of 1944, the mighty Red Army was rolling toward the Polish border, the last step before it swept into Germany. The Polish government was living in exile in London, and its cabinet met often with Churchill and his ministers, who in turn spoke often with Stalin and Roosevelt and their ministers about the future of Poland. Churchill worked persistently to make a deal for Poland under which it would give up extensive territories to the Soviet Union, promise friendly relations with the Soviets, and be compensated by territories to the west at the expense of Germany. On those conditions, Poland might be allowed to live in relative freedom and independence. But the Polish government in exile, which had been elected before the war, told Churchill that it had no mandate to give up the homes of millions of Poles to the Soviet Union. Why was that fair? What had Poland done wrong? Had not Churchill himself taken an absolute stand against Hitler, and did that not provide an example for Poland? More to the point, the Polish ministers wondered whether Churchill would join them if they made an absolute stand. Just as Britain had needed the help of the United States, so Poland needed the help of both Britain and the United States. In one of the many long and painful conversations between Churchill and the Polish cabinet, on November 3, 1944, Poland's prime minister mentioned another Polish statesman, General Anders. Churchill replied that he liked Anders, but added, "Keep in mind what he said to me. Today we are fighting the Germans, and tomorrow we shall fight the Russians." "This is sheer lunacy," Churchill said. "Don't reckon on our support in this." These were hard words. With sympathy and sadness, Churchill agreed that the Poles were entitled to decide for themselves, just as the British had been in 1940, but also as the British had, the Poles must be ready to bear the consequences. The Polish Prime Minister predicted that one day Poland would see better days. Those better days would come, but not until 2 generations of Poles would suffer under tyranny. In the end, no agreement was reached between Poland and the Soviet Union. This owed something to the noble stubbornness of the Poles, but much more to the ruthlessness and duplicity of Stalin. The Red Army swept across Poland and halfway across Germany. Almost all the land that it liberated, it also subjugated. What happened in Poland is like what happened in every nation that the Soviet Union, or for that matter, Nazi Germany, ruled. It was what Churchill feared would happen to Britain in 1940 if it were to fall under the influence of Hitler. In 1940, Churchill would take an absolute stand for his homeland, knowing that utter defeat was a possibility. In 1944, he would not take such a stand for Poland. Then there was Greece, a very different case from Poland. Britain had also made common cause before the war with Greece, and when Hitler invaded Greece, Churchill sent troops from his tiny resources to the unsuccessful relief of Greece. Now the war was approaching its end and the Germans were leaving Greece. Who would replace them? Greece, mind you, is on the sea, and it would eventually form part of the southeastern flank of NATO, founded after the war to deter the Soviet Union. During the same months that the Soviet Union was conquering Eastern Europe, Churchill made a deal, known as the Percentages Agreement, with Stalin. This infamous, or famous deal, recognized that the Soviet Union would have chief authority in the nations over which the Red Army was rolling. But it gave Britain chief authority over Greece, where Soviet allies in the Greek Communist Party constituted the most powerful partisan group. These communists were besieging Athens and threatened to establish a communist government in Greece as the Nazis were driven out. Churchill made this deal with Stalin only after repeated attempts from 1942 onwards to move the Allied armies south and east to give more help to southern and eastern Europe. These attempts had failed. The United States had responded, not without merit, that the shortest line to Berlin did not go through the Mediterranean, and certainly not the eastern Mediterranean. Churchill had hoped to forestall or at least limit the extent of Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. Only when that failed did he seek Stalin's agreement for Britain to take a strong hand in Greece. Within weeks, 5,000 British soldiers marched into Athens and broke the siege of the central government district. By force of arms, a coalition government was established that denied the Greek Communist Party domination. As the Second World War wound down, Greece could be saved from Soviet domination at an acceptable cost, and it was worth saving. Poland, also worth saving, could not. Right, Churchill believed, makes might, but it does not make it all the time and everywhere. A lesson America's leaders in recent decades have too often forgotten. Statesmen must do as much as it is possible to do at a cost that is acceptable, and they must not try to do more. And that was part 2 of this 3-part series on the 3 lessons of statesmanship. The third lesson I will read on Tuesday, which will be January the 9th. And this was an adaptation from a speech delivered by Larry P. Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College. And it was printed in Imprimis, which is a publication of Hillsdale College. And it is the December 2017 issue, volume 46, number 12. And today is the 7th of January. And like I said, I will be reading again from this on Tuesday, the 9th of January. And I will be making some comments at that time in terms of the lessons learned from this particular adaptation. And until then, if you want further reading or see more about what my podcast is about, check my blog at www.ronaldhardgrove.blogspot.com. And until Tuesday, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day.